Glad to introduce Angel Miller. She is the owner of Two Angel Mushroom Farm in Harrison, Tennessee. Also the marketing director at Ottawa Nursery and Landscape Company, and also manages the Ottawa Farmers Market that is held at the Ottawa Nursery. Angel notes that she's been growing figs many years here in the Chattanooga area and has over 100 varieties now. So this is a good time to listen to what grows in this area, and maybe at the end have time to pick her brain about it. Just a little bit about what she may be talking or will be talking about tonight is an introduction to figs and for fruit, how you can have them at your home. And among other things, she's going to discuss growing figs, winter protection, propagation, cultivars and different types of fruit that you might expect, and maybe how they taste and what you might enjoy. And welcome, Angel. So interested in hearing about figs.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be back with the Master Gardeners again. Thank you so much, Ron, for that gracious introduction. Really enjoy this group of people. You guys are just some of my favorites. So I am here tonight to talk to you guys about growing figs in this area. And I often talk to people and they will tell me that they have never before eaten a fig, which amazes me. Growing figs at home. We're going to be talking about growing figs in the Southeast for the home gardener, and we're going to cover several different things, and we're going to go pretty quickly here, so bear with me as we go forward. When we think about figs, a lot of people think about Adam and Eve covering themselves with the fig leaves. And is that forbidden fruit? I kind of wonder, because I often talk to people that say they have never before eaten a fresh fig, which is absolutely amazing to me. So I hope that when we're done here, that I will have piqued your curiosity and maybe tantalized you and encouraged you enough to start growing some figs. So figs were actually the first domesticated agricultural crop. Archaeologists found evidence that figs were cultivated about 11,000 years ago in the area of Jordan in the Middle East near Israel. So they were the first domesticated crop, and that was the beginning of agriculture. But we presume that that was after Adam and Eve. So figs can actually be grown very easily in the Southeast. We have a pretty moderate climate here, and with a little bit of adaptation, we can successfully grow figs at home, and they're pretty easy to grow. So why don't we see them any more than we do? I think that a lot of people maybe just aren't aware of what a wonderful plant they are, both for food as well as they're very decorative. The leaves on each cultivar are slightly different. Some of them are really quite lovely just for the foliage alone. So if the only thing you've ever had are these right here, yeah, a lot of people maybe have had brown turkey or maybe Celeste. You see those a lot in this area, but there are thousands of fig cultivars and each one is different. On your screen, you're going to see here the native range of Ficus carica. That's what we're talking about specifically in this particular topic today, is that particular species of ficus. There's a lot of ficus, you know, fiddle leaf figs, the ficus that we have as houseplants. But this one specifically, Ficus carica, is a deciduous tree which produces fruit. And we know about probably several different varieties in this area that you've seen, but you may not realize where they originally are from. So you can see on the map the areas there that are highlighted. They are native to the Mediterranean and Southwest Asia, but they're now grown worldwide. And there are actually several countries that are not highlighted in red here that probably should be, like Portugal. I have some figs in my collection from Portugal. I see, for example, Egypt is not highlighted. I have a wonderful Egyptian fig, Isbat Anaj, that has like a tropical kind of a pineapple flavor to it. So they're all over in this region. And when you think about that climate, you want to keep that in mind, what that climate is like in the Mediterranean. It's very warm there, and it's very different than what we have here in the Southeast. That's what they are acclimated to, and that's what they like. So we have to keep that in mind as we are growing them so that we can be aware of how to meet their needs best. Okay, so one thing I want to note about a fig is not a fruit. And that's surprising. A fig is actually an inflorescence. It's a cluster of many flowers and seeds that is inside this bulbous stem called a syconium. A fig is actually a flower that is inside out. The flowers are on the inside. And that's a unique thing there that you don't see very often. The hobby of collecting and growing figs is really trending up right now. And there are many people that are coming into the hobby. And as Ron mentioned recently, he had been on a forum called Our Figs, which is a place where people who are interested in figs, growing figs, trading figs, can go there, talk to other people, get questions answered, and it is a fabulous resource. So if you are at all interested in learning more about figs, write that down, It's a really great resource for you. So make sure that you check that out. But that's a good way to get into the hobby and start understanding more about it. And we are seeing, just in the few years that I have been on that forum, I've seen the numbers just increase of people that are joining the hobby and joining the forum. And so that shows me that there's a really strong interest in growing and eating figs. But like we said, a fig is not actually a fruit, it is an inflorescence. Now, this is what a fig is like on the inside. This diagram kind of shows the inside of the fig. We have on the inside at the bottom, you'll see a little open hole that's called the ostiole, or the eye of the fig commonly. And on the inside is where you see the male and the female flowers of the syconium. Okay, so because a fig is not a fruit, that it's an inflorescence and the flowers are on the inside, this is a really unusual and unique thing that you see. And the particular way that a fig reproduces is unique as well, because it can't be pollinated by the bees and other pollinators. The wind, for example, those pollinators are not going to work well in this particular setup. So because of this unusual arrangement, the seeds, which are technically the ovaries of the fig, require a specialized pollinator. And that is what you're seeing on your screen right now. This pollinator is adapted to navigate within the syconium. And there are several species of fig wasps throughout the world, but this particular species of fig, the Ficus corica, can only be pollinated by one species, the Blastophaga sinus. It's a very tiny little wasp, and you can see this is zoomed in really well to see how small this little wasp is. And there's a lot of incorrect information on the internet about the wasp and its relationship to figs. And we're going to kind of dispel some of those myths tonight, and we're going to get at the truth, but we better need to understand the way that figs cross-pollinate before we can do that. So let's talk about some types of figs here, some categories. So the male fig, and there is a photo there on the right, it has both male and female flowers in it, but it is considered functionally male because it is producing pollen. And we could talk a lot about male Capri figs, but that's probably more than we need to go into right now, but just know they can be further subdivided and they're usually not edible. But they do contain both male and female flowers. Now, so that's the male fig. Let's look at females. Females can be broken down into other categories. Now, the female syconium does contain both male and female flowers, but it's functionally female. The first category we want to look at is a Smyrna fig. And you can see the picture of the figs on the right. Most of the figs that are in commercial production are Smyrna types. Now, a Smyrna type can only produce edible fruit if it is pollinated by the fig wasp. Without pollination, when it produces fruit, they're just not going to ripen and they're just going to fall off and drop. So the commercial figs, though, that you see, usually like dried figs from overseas, in the grocery store, like on this picture, those are Smyrna-types that have been pollinated, ripened, and dried. Okay, so then the next type we're going to look at is called San Pedro. The San Pedro needs to be pollinated as well, but its first crop, the Breba crop, will ripen without pollination, without being caprified. The main crop figs will drop if it doesn't receive pollination. So here we don't have the fig. That means that main crop figs are going to drop, but we do get ripe Breba crop figs. And in the photo there is a variety called Desert King. And you do occasionally see that for sale at different garden centers here in the area. You will occasionally see Desert King. It is grown just for that delicious Breba crop only. So it does do well in our climate, but it has a different pruning strategy. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that as we go. Let's go on to the next type. So common figs. This is also female. This is the third type of female figs, common figs. They do not require any cross-pollination in order to ripen fruit. They will produce fruit. It'll be delicious. You will see seeds in it. However, those seeds are actually not functional. They're sterile. They're not going to grow and germinate in any way. Some varieties of common figs can ripen up to 3 crops every year. So let's look a little bit more at that. The first crop that can be ripened is this Breba crop. The San Pedro and the common figs, not all of the common figs, but many of them have the potential to be able to produce a Breba crop. San Pedro only produces a Breba crop and then will drop its main crop without pollination. But the common figs, some of them produce a Breba crop, not all of them. That is your first crop of the year. The Breba crop develops on last year's growth only. That's a key, because if your fig tree is in the ground and you get winter damage, that means that the fruit is not going to produce, because it's only going to produce on last year's growth. Now, the Breba crop in our area can begin ripening in late May up to July, depending on whatever the schedule is of that cultivar. Different ones ripen at different times. So I'm going to show you some photos from some of my figs. In the picture there, I've got Uncle Corky's Honey Delight, and you can see the date there of June the 1st. So here's some actual photos of that developing. So this is totally dormant. This is like early February. This is inside my mushroom grow room. So you can kind of see the metallic walls there behind it in our specialized installation. But those little knobs that are on there are tiny little Breba crop figs that have not yet begun to develop. The tree is asleep and is hibernating. But it doesn't take long before they start to swell. And you can see that the leaves have not even begun to swell. The bud for the leaves at the top, the apical bud, has not even started to swell yet. Those little figs begin to swell. They're the first signs of awakening fig trees that you get, is those little green figs starting to develop. And that always gets me excited because I know the fruit is coming. I love seeing that. And so here you can see how much they've grown. This is the same exact branch. And they have grown that much, and the leaves are just now beginning to emerge at this point. And then we still have them indoors. Look how large they have gotten and grown. They're everywhere on the tree. The leaves are still young. And at this point, I still have not been able to move them outside because we're still in a frost potential. We're not past our last date of frost. But they were able to ripen, and here is a picture of those, and that crop came off the tree in June. My Desert King has ripened as early as late May. So Uncle Corky's is a delicious fig, and I grow it primarily for its Breba, but it is a common fig and it can produce 2 crops. Okay, let's go on to the All right, let's talk a little bit more about main crop. So the The main crop figs can be 1, 2, or 3, 1, 2, or 3 crops. But when I'm talking about the first crop, that's the Brava crop, and then the main crops come after that. So that would be your second or third crop if you're looking at them in that terms. Common figs can produce 1 or 2 main crops. Some of them ripen continuously from the first fig that ripens all the way up until frost. It'll ripen one fig after another. Other varieties will ripen their figs within a short window, and you'll get a lot of figs over a brief period of time. For example, Celeste is one that many people know, and it tends to ripen over several weeks. It will ripen all of its figs, and then it's done. So it's kind of like determinate and indeterminate tomatoes, although we don't apply that term here, but it's the same idea, either getting several figs continuously until frost or getting a crop within a short window and then it's done. And different cultivars have different traits in how they do that. Some will ripen continuously, some over a short variety. So if you get early varieties that can do that third crop, the second main crop, we have a long enough window that you may very well get that. In the photo there, I've got the variety Flanders. We were able to ripen the third crop off of that this year, and we were just very excited about that. We actually got that fig in November, which is very unusual to get one that late. Normally we've already had a frost, but we got that fig just before the frost hit, and the last ones of the year are the most precious for sure. Now, main crop grows on this year's growth. The Breva grows on last year's growth. Main crop only grows on this new growth this year. So that's important. So if your tree, for example, is in the ground, we have a super cold winter and you haven't protected it and it dies completely to the ground. First of all, you know off the bat you're not getting a Breva crop, but you could possibly still get figs off of that, because as it grows, some varieties will produce even a year after they have been completely killed to the ground. After a total dieback, there are many varieties that can produce a main crop. And that's a really exciting characteristic of figs, is that they can ripen fruit even after such devastation. They are very resilient and they will often come back from the roots. Especially as the tree begins to mature and get more well established after a few years, you'll have less and less dieback. They do need to be protected, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The main crop usually starts ripening in July all the way up into frost in our area. And it will depend on your variety. Different varieties are early, mid, and late. I have some varieties that don't start ripening figs until like October, which is really late for our area. So you have to think, do I want to put that much work into a fig if I'm only going to be able to eat fruit for a few weeks? It's probably wise to focus on varieties that will fruit earlier so that you have a longer harvest period and a longer time to be able to enjoy those figs. Okay, so now that we've got that down and we understand about Breva crop and main crop and what they produce and how, let's talk about that reproduction with that wasp. Let's go back to that. So we've learned about the male and female figs. But how do figs reproduce, and what does the wasp have to do with all of this? There's a lot of talk about the wasp and a lot of confusion, so we're about to clear that up. In order for a fig to reproduce from seed, the female flowers have to be cross-pollinated with male pollen. And this fig wasp is the agent of that, and it is one specific species of wasp only that does that. Now, pollination can be done by hand if you have both male and female fig trees, and it's not easy, but it's possible. You could do that. Now, let's look at the life cycle here on how this wasp is actually accomplishing its job. So we're going to start at number 1, which is at about the 10 o'clock location there on your screen. So we have a pollen-laden female wasp that's going to enter into an unripe fig through that eye, that hole in the bottom, the ostiole. And the fig wasp will enter in there, and then it's going to pollinate the flowers and lay her eggs. As she lays the eggs, the flowers with the wasp larva form a gall, and then some of those, also those flowers will produce seeds that got pollinated. Then the male wasp, when they first emerge, they're the first ones, the males emerge first out of those galls, and then they are pollinating the females, their sisters. And when those males then will die, they don't ever leave that particular fig. They are inside that, and they're going to die in there. And the fig will absorb them back up into its body through enzymes. And so they're going to disappear. The females are then going to emerge, and they're going to leave the fig itself, and they're going to fly to another fig. They may have received pollen on them as they are leaving, and if they do, they're going to pollinate the next fig. Now, this is a really short overview. We could spend a lot of time talking about this one thing, but it's important to understand this symbiotic relationship between these two organisms, because the fig wasp cannot live apart from the fig, but the fig cannot reproduce sexually apart from the wasp. They need each other. And it's really interesting relationship. And we've heard about that. People say, well, you know, I don't want to eat a fig because it might have a wasp in it. Well, common varieties do not require pollination in order to make fruit. We've already talked about that. Secondly, the fig wasp is not present in the Southeast. We do not have that species of insect here. It is not hardy. Our winters are too cold, and it cannot live here because it would, in essence, be killed out by the cold that we experience in our climate. So no locally grown figs ever contain a wasp, ever. And the nurseries in our area only carry common figs, but you do occasionally see a San Pedro like the Desert King that we mentioned. So when you're buying a fig tree in this area and you're thinking about growing them for fruit, you're not going to have to worry about, oh no, what if I don't have the wasp, my fruit, I'm not going to get fruit. You are going to get fruit. There are not going to be any wasp inside your fruit. Now, figs that are grown commercially, like the ones we talked about earlier, the Smyrna, that require pollination, they do have the wasp, and they are able to pollinate and get fruit. But is there a wasp in your fig if you eat a dried fig? Well, yes and no. Most likely not, because like I said, those are, the bodies are absorbed back up into the fig as it grows. Many vegans will choose not to eat figs because they are concerned about the possibility of the remains of some wasp being in there. But what you need to know, especially if you're vegan, is that in our area, there is no wasp present. They are not in these figs that we are growing. It's not a part of how these figs are going to reproduce. So we are not going to have any figs with wasp in them in our area. So I hope that eases your mind if that's something that you have worried about or been concerned about in any way. All right, let's go on to more about reproduction. So the fertilized seeds that are fertilized in areas that have the wasp are not going to produce offspring that are true to the parents. So we really don't grow figs from seed at all, because the fig seed, it could be anything. It could turn out to be a Capra fig, a male fig. It could be Smyrna, San Pedro, common. The odds of any one fertilized seed producing an actual common fig are only about 1 in 1,000. So figs are rarely propagated from seed. But in the United States, the bastophage wasp is not present, except in the area of California. In the 1880s, they began trying to grow figs commercially in Southern California because the climate there is very similar to the Mediterranean area. And so they were trying to get a new growing system established there. And for years, they couldn't get a crop. The figs are dropping, the figs are dropping. And to jump forward in the story, the U.S. Department of Agriculture actually imported the fig wasp from the Middle East to Southern California, where it now has naturalized and is present. So because of that, you have figs growing wild in California. There are many places in California where you can be driving and you'll see like a water drainage area awash, and there will just be hundreds of fig trees growing all up and down the sides of that area. And many people have now started going out and exploring those areas looking for new cultivars. Like I said, the odds of any one seed turning out to be a common fig are about 1 in 1,000. But then how many of those are actually something that are going to be really tasty or good or unique enough to want to grow it? So the odds are just really exponential there on the possibility of finding a wild fig tree growing in nature that is common and is going to be really good. But there are people out there that do that as a hobby. They get out, they explore, they're hiking, and they're trying these figs, and they have to take and grow that somewhere else where the figs are not going to be cross-pollinated to ensure that it is common and prove that it's common. So there are people that are introducing new varieties that are being found even right now because we do have that wasp present in the California area. But for the state of California, that's actually considered an invasive species. They are actively out cutting down these wild fig trees that are reproducing as birds eat the fruit and spread the seeds, and trying to inhibit them. And so sometimes when we bring in these non-native species, they become invasive. And we've learned that over history many times, and that's what's happened in California. But we don't have them here. So if they are rarely propagated from seed, how do we have new fig trees growing? Good question. Asexual propagation. So we're talking about clones, an exact genetic copy of a parent that has the same genetics, and we do this with scion wood, by cuttings, by air layers, by ground layers. And it is an easy and simple way to select a cultivar that has some characteristics or properties that we think are desirable, and to be able to multiply that and expand it. And it's pretty simple to do, thankfully, because figs root very easily. That's one of the characteristics of the ficus, is that they do root very easily, and that is something that we can use to our advantage. Okay. So on rooting figs, I wanted to just let you know, if you want to learn more about that, I have a YouTube tutorial that takes you step by step on one method of how to root a fig cutting. That's on my YouTube page. If you're interested, you can go there and check that out. Okay, just a moment. Okay, so that's rooting. Rooting is taking, and I should probably expand a little bit there, rooting is taking those dormant cuttings, which this time of year right now is when the fig community is busy rooting their cuttings. Some people will wait till spring, but when the trees are dormant or when you're going to take cuttings, that's when you're doing your pruning. And pruning is a whole topic unto itself. It is something that we could talk about for hours. Many people have different philosophies. Whether you're doing a tree form or whether you're doing a bush form. Pruning a San Pedro is very different than pruning a common fig. So that is a whole topic that really is beyond the scope of the time that we have today. But just know that people are pruning their fig trees right now while they're dormant. And taking those cuttings, you can expand those by rooting them. And you're going to use some kind of a rooting medium. It could be directly in water. It could be using soil. I like to use HP Pro Mix, which really drains really well. There's several different methods that are out there right now, and we're always trying new and different things on rooting figs. Another thing you can do with your cuttings is grafting them. And that is pretty simple and easy to do, and it's something I would like to learn more about. I've done a little bit of it, but there is really an art to grafting, and there's different grafting methods that are available. But grafting is a really quick way to try out a new cultivar that you want to trial and see if it's something that you like and want to grow. because if you graft that onto an established rootstock, another fig, like say you've got a brown turkey, makes a great rootstock for grafting in our area. Hopefully if that graft takes, you are very likely to get fruit this year from it. So you graft it now, and hopefully this year you will get fruit and get a chance to trial it and see if you like it. So that's a good way to start them. You can take one cutting and do several grafts off of just one cutting, whereas if you're rooting a cutting, you may only be able to root just that cutting, maybe cut it and get 2 rootings off of it, but most likely you're just going to use that one cutting and root just that cutting. So with grafting, you can get quite a bit off of that. So that's another thing that is a good way to propagate figs, and pretty easy to do. Another thing is air layering. Now this is done when the plant is actively growing, not during the dormant season like now. But doing an air layer is, again, pretty simple to do. That is an air layer I did on my LSU Gold, and you can just see all the roots that developed inside that box. And I cut it off, plant the roots, and I've got a new tree. And figs just root so easily that we can use these methods and employ them to propagate new trees. And that's a class that we actually taught at the Fig Frolic in 2019. And hopefully we will do that again on how to set an air layer step by step from start to finish. Another similar technique is the ground layer, where you're basically, this is kind of the old Italian man way of propagating figs. You're just going to lay down a branch and cover it with soil and wait until it develops roots, cut it off, and you have a new plant. Pretty simple and easy to do. Asexual propagation for figs is actually something that anyone can do at home, and it doesn't require very many special tools other than maybe a grafting knife if you're going to do some grafting. So it's a great thing to do in the wintertime. We don't have a lot of gardening projects, so it's a good time to start your fig cuttings and maybe do some grafting and stuff like that. Okay, so let's talk about actually growing figs in our area. There's 2 ways that we're going to do that. First, the conventional thing, growing them in the ground. That's one of our brown turkeys there in the photo. You can tell I don't take really good care of them. I'm not a big fan of brown turkey. They're good. They have that sugar flavor and they have that figgy flavor, but it's not one of my favorites, and those have been planted for a long time, so they kind of have to fend for themselves, but the birds enjoy them, and I use them as a diversion crop and let the birds have those brown turkeys and feed the birds. Now the pros of going with the in-ground method is you can have larger plants. You can get better production because you have a larger plant. It's going to be less watering requirements because they're in the ground, they're going to be watered by nature, their roots can get pretty deep, and they've got better access to water. So you don't have to do a whole lot of summer maintenance. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time watering in-ground figs. So that's one of the pros, is that added production. That's great if you can do that. Not everybody has the space. So one of the cons of growing figs in ground is they are subject to winter killback and damage from cold. And so they are going to require winter protection. They require a lot of space. You need to give your fig tree probably a good 12 feet, I would say. Many of them can get quite large. Even though you're pruning it every winter and you're going to be pruning it back, they are still going to really spread out. My 8-year-old Celeste, it's probably 20 feet tall this year, and I pruned it back to probably 10 feet, I guess.
Actually, it's about 6 feet.
Okay, it grew about 6 feet of growth in one growing season, and I've pruned it back that much. So it is a really big tree when it gets established. Some are larger, some are smaller, and it will depend on the variety, but it's going to require more space than you might realize at first. So that's something to consider when you're looking for a spot in order to be able to plant one in the ground. Also, they're more subject to fruit loss. Birds, squirrels, and you can see I've had some damage to that fig right there. A bird had a nice meal and I missed out on it. But that's what's going to happen. They get so big that it's difficult to put nets over them. One tactic that I do use to kind of hinder the birds is I will use the little origami organza gift bags, and just slip a little organza bag around the fig and tighten it. And usually that will keep the birds off, not always. Sometimes they can be pretty aggressive. Another thing you've got to worry about is trunk damage, especially during the winter. Rabbits, groundhog, voles, even deer, they sometimes in the wintertime food is scarce and the bark on your tree is a good meal, and they can really do some serious damage. Usually if that happens, your tree is going to regrow from the roots, most likely, but it can be problematic and difficult to deal with. And fig trees definitely are going to require winter protection. Recall that their native country is that Mediterranean climate. That's what they're acclimated to. So in our area, when we get down sometimes in the, below 15, there's definitely a possibility that you're going to have some damage to your tree. And that is typical in our area most winters. So being able to protect your tree, there are so many different methods that you could use. If you are growing in zones 6, 5, or even 4, you're going to have to really be aggressive about that. You're going to be wrapping your tree. You're going to be maybe building an enclosure around it. And for every fig grower you talk to, they have a different method for protecting their trees. The old Italian method was to halfway dig up the roots on one side, lean the entire tree over to the ground, bundle it up and tie it as tightly as you can, and then put something like leaves over it to try to insulate it through the winter. In the spring, you right the tree and replant the roots on that side. So there's so many different ways to insulate. One of the things that I have done is I will use pipe insulation, that thick foam insulation, and I'll put that on the branches. We're kind of in a little bit more of a mild climate, so we don't have to go to the extremes to protect our trees as some of the figgers up north will have to in zones 5 and 6. So minimal protection, but you're going to need some protection. So that's something to consider if you're thinking about putting your tree in ground. Let's go back. One thing that I would like to add is if you can plant your fig on a south-facing wall, that can create a little microclimate that may help with any winter cold. So that is another thought, but you want to consider the foundation because the roots can be pretty aggressive. You don't want, anything underground, some water lines, pipes, anything like that, or even the foundation of your house to be damaged. So these are some of the things you have to think through when you're trying to find the right space to plant your fig tree. Okay, another method of growing, and this is where most of my figs are growing in containers. It's just a great way to grow. I've got more than 100 in containers, and it's a lot. It's a lot to move, but it's a great way to do it. It's going to reduce that risk of winter damage and dieback, and they're portable. So let's say you have a great fig tree that you really love, and it's in ground, and you decide to sell your house and move. You can take cuttings with you and start over. That's how many figs actually ended up in America. Immigrants came from the old world and they brought those sticks in their pocket. And we're still discovering some really great trees that were brought over from the old country. But if you have your trees in a pot, you pick up the pot and you go, and then they can go with you. So portability is a plus. You also have better control over the environmental conditions. Figs usually like a little bit of a drier climate. We have a lot of rain in our area. We have a lot of humidity. This past year of 2020 was one of the wettest years that we had on record. We came very close to tying the all-time historic record for the wettest year in history. We had over 70 inches of rain. That's a lot of rain, and that has an impact on the figs. They can be susceptible to rust. You have rainy periods where it can rain every day for like a week or two, and you'll see the leaves are starting to yellow, and you know they're getting too much water. If you have your figs in a pot, you can move them. You could maybe cover them. You know, if you have a place that you can put them, like maybe move them into a garage or something, if you wanted to do that. It's also a great way to trial a new variety before you make that commitment of putting it in ground, because that's a long-term commitment. Once it's in ground, it's there and it's going to stay. But as you begin to learn about these different fig varieties, you'll find that your preferences will end up going in a certain direction. Like, for example, I have a friend that absolutely loves the variegated figs. He wants to collect every variety that is variegated that he can find. That's his thing. Some people like a certain flavor profile. Some people like a certain leaf structure. Some people like a certain growth habit. Like if you're growing in ground, you definitely want to look for cultivars that are more cold tolerant, for example, especially ones that are early. So there's different things that you will begin to learn what your favorites are as you kind of get into the hobby more. And growing them in a pot will give you a chance to kind of test drive that particular variety and see how is it working for you? Is it what you want it to be? Okay, some of the cons of growing in a container. First of all, the pot size is going to limit the amount of fruit potential. So a smaller pot, like a 5-gallon, if that's as large as you go with that fig tree, you're going to only expect a certain number of fruit off of that. Whereas if you have your fig in, say, a 20-gallon, you're going to get larger production. So the pot size is going to limit the production potential on the fruit. Another con is watering. They're going to need to be watered more frequently. You could set up an irrigation system on a timer, and when you have this many trees, you definitely want to do that, because nobody wants to spend 2 hours a day watering fig trees by hand. My husband is raising his hand right now and agreeing. But you also have to do the fig shuffle, and we kind of joke about the fig shuffle. It's a dance we don't like doing, but we have to, because we don't want these trees to be killed. Their roots now are in these containers above ground and are subject to freezing. We don't want the roots to freeze. So if you have your trees in a container during the winter time, rather than protecting them by wrapping them, you're going to protect them by moving them into an area that is protected, like, for example, an unheated garage or outbuilding. As long as they can stay, you know, below 50 degrees, they're going to stay dormant. So bringing them in your house as a house plant really won't work. That's not ideal. You want to have a place where it's going to be cool through the winter and they're going to stay dormant but protected. And you have to remember to water them. Usually in dormancy during the winter, you got to water them about maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks. They do use some water because they are alive, but they don't have leaf that are respiring. So the water usage demand definitely decreases. But you have to water them in storage too. So that winter storage can be a challenge. And you can see in the picture all my varieties here. And this is not even all of them, actually. This is the main stack of fig trees. This is inside our mushroom grow room. They're pretty happy in there. The grow room is about 45 to 55 degrees. So they're able to stay dormant. We have access to water in there. It's humid. We actually have all of the lighting in there is like 65K. So when they do finally start to wake up, they have lighting for the leaves so they can photosynthesize. So that works really good for me. But sometimes you have to get creative and think about, okay, if I grow this in a pot, where am I going to put it in the winter? So there's pros and cons to either way of growing. Now we've got a few minutes left, and I'm going to give you a treat here. We're going to run through quickly some of the varieties that I grow and some of their characteristics, just to give you an idea of what's out there. Okay, everybody probably knows Celeste. You know, if you haven't had brown turkey, you may have also had Celeste. Those two are very, very popular in the Southeast. It's a common fig, and it produces one crop. The Braba crop drops and the third crop drops. But that middle crop, the main crop, is just absolutely wonderful, and it produces over a short period of time. So it's a really good one if you're wanting to do any canning, jams, jellies, preserves. This is a great one for that. The flavor is a light berry. Whereas if you're familiar with the brown turkey, that's what we call a sugar fig. It's just sugary, that figgy flavor. But Celeste is a berry flavor, so it's very different in taste. It's the heritage fig of the South. This is the fig that was used by LSU in their famed breeding program that is now defunct. They produced a lot of really great cultivars for the South, and their goal was to create varieties that would be good for homeowners in their backyard, in the South, in our humid conditions. And so a lot of the LSU figs do really good in our area, and we recommend those. And there's a lot of them. There's quite a few, both official releases and some that were unofficially released. So this one is actually pretty cold hardy once it's established. Mine died back the first couple of years without any protection. I protected it for a few years. I don't protect it anymore. And I've had zero cold damage, even on the tips. We have had 10 degrees so far this winter at my house, and I have zero damage on my tree. The fruit never splits in rainy conditions, which is a plus. And it's a very small size fruit too. So that's kind of a drawback. LSU Gold, one of those great LSU cultivars. This one has two crops. It does a breva and a main crop, and the main crop continues to ripen up until frost. I love the flavor on this. When it is ripened in dry conditions, if we have a dry period where it's not raining during the time that fruit is ripening, it tastes a lot like pears and honey. And I really like that fig. It's just delicious. The ostiole on it is closed, and so you don't have much problems with insects or spoiling in the rain, and it's very humidity tolerant. All the LSU figs are very tolerant of humidity and rain. Here is LSU Purple. It also has two crops. The flavor on this one is kind of like maple sugar candy. It's a really sweet fig, but it has to get to a point where it's mature before that flavor really develops. It also has a closed eye. It's a very prolific producer, but it suckers really heavily. So you have to stay on that and keep trimming those suckers back in its first few years, and it kind of outgrows that trait. Now here is a heritage fig that's interesting, you don't see very often. This is the Hunt fig, and it was actually bred in Georgia, in Eatonton, Georgia in the 1920s. And it is just a really, really good fig, but you don't see it very often. W.E. Hunt bred this, and he was very influential in the early years of Georgia's agriculture. He ended up becoming Georgia's state agricultural director, and then was eventually the head of what is now the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And he bred this fig, the Hunt fig, and also I believe a muscadine as well, the Hunt muscadine. We really like this one. We just grew this starting last year. It's very precocious. And even though it was less than 1 year old, we've already got fruit off of that, which you see in the photo. And we were very surprised by the flavor of this. It tasted like banana, and it even had a texture that was creamy the way a banana has, which is very unusual for a fig. So we're liking the Hunt fig, and we are hoping to see more of that this coming year as it continues to produce. Hardy Chicago. I know Suzanne has this one. In fact, my Hardy Chicago in that picture came from a cutting that Suzanne gave me. So I've been growing this fig now for a few years, and she and I are both fans of it. Another common fig. It has a rich berry flavor. And this fig was originally found growing in a Chicago neighborhood, probably one that an immigrant had brought over with them. And it was unprotected in Chicago, which is a very cold, cold climate. So this is one that is more cold tolerant than most. And this is a really good candidate for in-ground in our area. It's a reliable producer of good quality, tasty figs. So we recommend that one. Flanders, we really like this fig. This is a common fig, produces 3 crops. Last year, we successfully ripened the breva and then 2 main crops. The 3rd crop ripened in late October and into November for us. Love this fig. It's a little bit large in size, and we think that as it continues to grow, it's going to get larger. The flavor on this was very different. It has tropical fruit flavors. It's hard to describe because it was a blend of several tropical fruits, but it did not have a figgy flavor at all. And I like tropical fruit, so I'm really keen on this variety and looking forward to more this year. Now, this is one that might be familiar to you, Violet de Bordeaux. This one is often grown in the South. This is an heirloom French fig, very high quality. It's a very prolific grower, very precocious. The fruit can split in rainy periods. That does happen. And mine seems to just require a lot more water than my other figs. It's just thirsty. But that complex Bordeaux berry flavor is more than worth it. It's hard to describe, but it's just very, my husband's over here drooling. One of our favorite figs. It's just absolutely fantastic figs. So that one's one that you can find readily at a lot of garden centers. I know that Ottawa Nursery has it. We normally have that one, and the Hunt fig I also got from Ottawa Nursery. Brooklyn White. This is one I'm really, really excited about. It's a common fig. It produces 2 crops. It has a strawberry honey flavor that is really, really good. It's hard to describe. It's just very refreshing would be a good way to describe it. It was discovered growing in an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, without protection for many, many years. It was several decades old. So we know that it's very cold tolerant in the fact that it was able to survive in Brooklyn without protection. And it is a very prolific producer. My tree was in its 2nd leaf, and it had figs on every node. So really produced a lot of really good figs for us, even as a very young tree. And that's one of the great things about figs, is you can get fruit so much quicker. Many fruit trees, you have to wait, 4, 5, 6 years before they really start producing. A fig may very well have fruit for you the very first year, but usually by year 2 or 3, you should start having some fruits that you can enjoy. And that's a pretty quick turnaround time. So that's pretty good. Okay, let's move on. Adriatic JH, you can see that one had split for me down there in the bottom picture. It's a little bit later, but it's got a strawberry raspberry flavor. It sets a lot of fruit. Look how many figs are on that leaf there. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, it's like 6 or 7 on that. It's just a wonderful fig though, but it can split if it's exposed to a whole lot of rain. So that's just one of the drawbacks. Sometimes there's always a price to pay. Uncle Corky's Honey Delight. I mentioned this one. This is another heritage fig. I love the flavor on this one. The Braba crop, again, if it's in dry weather, it has a flavor like melons, like a watermelon kind of flavor. It's just really good. But the main crop has a completely different flavor. It's more like a honey sugar fig. Olympian, this is one that's grown in our area. This one has like a sugary caramel flavor with like peach notes, and I'm a big fan of peaches, so I really like that. This is an English brown turkey type. Now keep in mind there's Southern brown turkey, English brown turkey, and California brown turkey. They are all similar types, but they have some very important differences. This is English brown turkey type, but the Olympian fig has the sugary caramel peach flavor, and it can make some really large figs, and it does well in cool climates, very popular in the Pacific Northwest or other maritime climates because it will produce consistently there. Desert King, this is a San Pedro, grown exclusively for the Breba crop. It also likes cool climates like the Pacific Northwest. And San Pedros require a different pruning strategy because remember, they only produce on last year's wood. So that is, you have to be really careful when you're pruning these. So what I do is after the first crop has finished, that's when I prune mine. So you can see the date there of the fruit written in this picture. I harvested that on the 29th of May, which is really early. So even though it's not going to produce a main crop for me later in the year, I still grow this one because it is so early. It's just great to be able to get a ripe fig in May. And then once that crop comes off, that's when I will prune this one back so that it has time to grow the rest of the growing season. And then that new growth will produce figs next year. Raspberry Latte. Dark berry fig with a very complex flavor. As the fig ages, it continues to improve, and I like it because it has a little bit of acidity, that raspberry kind of flavor. Really great fig, and produces a lot of figs on it. Figs at every node, sometimes 2 figs per node. Really good fig. And this one, I'm going to kind of end our little cultivar tour with this one right here. That picture is the best fig I had last year. That was so good that there are no words that can describe how good that fig was in that picture. There are some things in this life that cannot be explained. They have to be experienced. White Madeira is one of them.
Oh, yeah.
The flavor is so complex and so rich. It's just undescribable. Really, really great fig. It's a green fig, which is great for growing in ground. Green figs are less noticed by the birds. So if you have birds that you know bother your fruit, try to focus on growing some of the green skinned figs, because a lot of times the birds won't realize when they ripen. This fig originates from Madeira, Portugal. It's pretty cold tolerant. The main crop is a little late, I would say medium to late on that one. It starts ripening in September for me, but the fruit is absolutely of the highest quality. And I'm growing, you know, over 100 varieties now. I've got 50 different new varieties that are rooting right now. Now is the time to acquire figs. So I'm going to give you a quick do's and don'ts, and then we are done. Our time is up. I would avoid things like eBay and Etsy and other websites. You know, if you're trying to buy a white Madeira #1, they're going to want to sell that to you because that's a pricey, very desirable, rare fig. And they may send you sticks that are brown turkey, and you don't know that until 2 or 3 years later, and your scammer is long gone. So on those particular sites, I would avoid them because it's so long to find out whether or not what you receive is true to type or not. There's no recourse if you end up not getting the right thing. So I would avoid things like eBay and Etsy and other auction sites. And I hate to say it, but I also avoid big box stores. They tend to frequently be mislabeled there. I recommend that you buy from reputable nurseries. We have several in this area that are great nurseries. You know that I work at Ottawa Nursery, and we carry about 12 different varieties here last year. We haven't yet received this year's list. I asked them before this, what are we going to have? Can I give them a little preview of what's to come? Because we get different ones each year. Each year they're different, but they don't have that information available yet. But there are many other nurseries that you could check out. Normally you're going to see 2 or 3 varieties, but you never know. It's worth a visit to look and see what they have in stock this spring. Also check out FigBid. That is a site where you can buy online safely, because the people that own and run the FigBid site are vetting the people that are on there, and they are known in the community and they have reputation. So FigBid is a good place to go and look for trees and cuttings. Right now it's cutting season, so you're going to see a lot of cuttings on there. I do have cuttings for sale on my own website, and I will have plants this spring. Another source for acquiring figs is trading with others. It's a great way to make friends who have the same interest as you. That's my friend Alistair right there, last summer at the farmer's market, bringing me a fig that he grew that we were trading. So I snapped his picture as he walked up carrying my new fig tree, and we just traded. If I had bought that tree, that's probably a $200 tree for that variety of that size, but we just traded even, and it was no money out of my pocket. So trading is a really great way to make this an affordable hobby. You don't really have to even spend any money, but maybe some postage. So some places to learn about trading with others is the ourfigs.com forum. A lot of people on there doing free giveaways. I am doing a giveaway on there right now and on my website. If you want free Celeste cuttings, I will give you 3 cuttings for free. No strings attached. If you are local, you can pick it up in person and it won't cost you but a penny, or you could have it delivered, because we do delivery, or I ship. But the cuttings are absolutely free, and there's a lot of people on our figs that are giving away just free cuttings to help people get started in the hobby. Other local fig enthusiasts, if you can meet other people in the area, like when Suzanne gave me cuttings off of her Chicago hardy tree, and now years later I'm still enjoying fruit off of that tree. That was such a blessing in my life. So having friends that grow trees they can share with you. So it's good to make those connections. And then finally, the Fig Frolic, which we are hoping to have this fall. If things go as planned, we can't always be certain with this virus. Things have been completely in flux the whole time, but it's looking positive, and I am hopeful for the future that we will be able to have the Fig Frolic this year. We have speakers and classes. You get to meet other figgers. We have a white elephant giveaway. You may come and never have tasted a fig in your life, never have grown a fig tree, and don't own one. But when you leave, you will have tasted figs, met other figgers, and leave with a fig tree of your own, because we want to make sure that everybody leaves with something. We even do a trading table if you have something that you want to bring to trade. So it's a really fun event, and we are hoping to do that again this year. If you would like to be notified by email, you could just shoot me an email. My email address is on there, and I would be glad to add you to the notification list, and we will send out notices later this summer when we nail down the details and we figure out what we're able to do. So I thank you all for your attention, and I thank you for focusing on this, and I hope that I have piqued your interest about the many different figs that are out there, and maybe I hope I found one for you that you really want to grow. So I hope that you'll do that. Thank you.
Angel, that was great. Two angels mushroom. Who's the second angel?
That would be this guy right here. This is my husband, Michael. Of course, my name is Angel, but Michael is an archangel in the Bible. So that's why we're two angels. Good question.
So I have a question. Can you graft two different kinds of fig on one tree that's already growing?
That's a good question. Yes, you can. You can create your own Frankenfig. As many branches as you have, you can graft all the varieties you want. You absolutely can do that.
And is there a website or somewhere where you suggest that we can go to learn how to graft?
There are a lot of really great tutorials on YouTube. And also check out the ourfigs.com forum and just search for grafting, and there will just be a list. And there's a lot of different types of grafts, and different grafts are created different ways. And so there'll be information on there, and definitely check out YouTube. There's a lot on there as well. Yeah, it is almost impossible to conclusively identify a fig. They can be so different. To be honest with you, we do not have like a DNA database of all the cultivars. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, Wolfskill out in California, has sequenced the genome of about 200 varieties, but there's probably more like 2,000. And one of the gentlemen who is active on the ourfigs.com forum is a retired scientist, and he's currently working to get those genomes matched. And with hope, one day we'll be able to send in a tissue sample from a leaf and maybe get our figs identified. But without knowing for sure what the cultivar is, you move into a new place, you don't know. All we can do is guess at that point.
Angel, if you had like a picture or something and
Oh,
put
I do.
put it on our figs, would
Okay.
somebody there maybe give you best guess?
That they will. They can probably tell you. Most of the figs in our area are either going to be like maybe a black mission occasionally, but most of the time it's going to be a Celeste or some type of a brown turkey, English brown turkey, Southern brown turkey, or California brown turkey. You know, 9 times out of 10, that's what you're going to find. And they are climate in the Middle East down there is very hot and dry climate, so they like full sun. And most cultivars, 90% of them, really need that at least 8 hours a day of full direct sunlight, or they're not going to successfully ripen the fruit. If they do, the fruit is not going to have its full sugars, and it's just not going to be as tasty. So that full sun is important.
Is there any one type that's better rootstock?
Brown turkey. That's the one I use for rootstock. It's a vigorous tree. Grows really well in our area, or Celeste. Celeste grows so well in our area. They just make a really good rootstock, both of those. Yes,
that
February is
very
when we do that. I actually prune my trees as soon as they go dormant. I give them time for that sap to run down into the roots, and I know they're fully dormant. So I'm usually pruning in December, but that's because I'm selling cuttings. So I want to get that out to the community as soon as possible. But anytime before the fig starts waking up, so February is a great time to do that. You'll know usually by February whether or not you've got any damage, because we're starting to warm up a little bit in mid to late February. We're already starting to slowly warm up now. We've passed the midpoint of the deepest part of winter in our area. So February would be a great time.
When do you suggest that we bring, like I have one in a pot in the garage, when do you suggest we start bringing them out?
Outside?
Yeah.
Yes, I would do what's called the technique of hardening off. I'm going to introduce them outside gradually. So I would bring them out for a few hours and then put them back in, because they've got a big adjustment going from the indoor climate to outdoor weather. And you don't want sun scald on fresh leaves that have just developed, especially if it has a brava crop. That is really important, because if it has too much of a shock in temperature from moving it outside, it can cause it to drop that brava crop. So if you want to ripen it, you have to introduce it slowly and harden it off. Now, once we're past that date of last frost though, just introduce it and give it a few more hours each day. Like you could put it in a spot where maybe that spot gets, 2 or 3 hours, and then you could move it to where it gets 3 or 4 hours, and just gradually introduce it into full sun so that it's not shocked too much, and just gradually harden it off, just like you would your vegetable plants before you put them in the garden.
Cool, thank you. It's interesting that you mentioned the brava crop. Where I come from, and of course we speak another language, Spanish, but that word, they use it to call these figs that have been cooked down in sugar.
Really?
And we eat them a lot.
Ooh.
They're bravas. And they come in this sugary substance, and they're all green, very small, but they slice them in half and they put caramel in the inside. They're amazing.
Wow. Oh, that sounds so good.
As a child, I remember, and they're called brevas.
Well, that's so interesting. Wow. Thank you for sharing.
Just one more for me, Charles.
Okay, good.
Davidson here. If you're going to grow them in a container, is there any minimum size container that you recommend?
I wouldn't go any smaller than a 5-gallon.
Okay.
And then as the fig grows, you're going to want to up pot it. But once you hit your maximum size, whatever, there's a limit to how much you're going to want to move.
Right.
That is the truth, because I'm telling you, if you put a fig in a 20-25 gallon pot,
that's a lot to move.
you're gonna need a tow dolly to move that thing.
Right.
So once you settle on what your largest size is, and that's going to be its permanent home, you're going to have to root prune it after maybe 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And you want to do that just like you would other pruning when it's dormant. You're going to pull it out of the pot, cut any circling roots, and just prune those roots back and put some fresh soil in, and that will just reinvigorate it, and you should see it really take off and produce good after doing that. But you do have to root prune probably every 3 years once you reach the maximum pot size.
All right. If you planted one in the ground, how small could you maintain it?
That is really up to you. When you have a young tree that you have to initially train for shape, there's 2 different methods. You might pick a bush form, or you might pick a tree shape with a singular trunk. And so both of those have different pruning styles. So the bush form you see commonly, especially when people are not really maintaining their fig, they just buy a tree at Lowe's and stick it in the ground and hope it makes it. You will almost always see that in the quote unquote bush shape, where it has several different trunks. because when it dies back in the winter, you're going to see several sprouts. Now that's also going to be a lower form that's a little bit smaller and easier to pick. So it's really up to you. It's your preference.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Angel, got a lot of gold stars, people loving the presentation and learning a
Oh,
lot.
I love you back.
But there was a question about fertilization. Do you fertilize or
That
when
is
and
a
what
good
time?
question, and I didn't go into all that because I wasn't sure how much in depth we wanted to go, but I will give you a brief overview on fertilization schedule. So when the leaves are first emerging, you're wanting to go with a nice, well-balanced fertilizer, maybe a little bit elevated on the nitrogen side because it is growing actively and putting on new growth. However, once you begin to see that the tree is setting small fruits, you want to change your fertilization schedule and focus on something that has a higher middle number rather than a first number. And then once we get to the point of, I would say mid-September, cut off all fertilizing completely, because you want your growth that you have on that tree to lignify and firm up before it goes dormant. So that's important. And if it is being fertilized and you're pushing it to keep growing, you're going to have some really soft green tissue that can't go dormant. So you want to cut off the fertilizer in the middle of September to give it time to lignify and slow down.
Thank you, Angel.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always great being with you. I really appreciate the invitation. Nice seeing all your faces again. I hope we get to see each other in person soon.